Cryptocurrency has been with us for over 10 years, and this component of the financial world is still a mystery to some of us. We definitely hear about the volatility in the crypto markets and that there are winners and losers. And then there's a whole mining process, and what do we even use these digital currencies for? Well, to unravel and reveal more about cryptocurrencies and their connection to Medicine Hat and area, Ryan Chernisky, Director of Modern Mining, joins me today. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, Ryan, can you maybe give us a brief idea of what crypto or digital currencies are?
Yeah, so digital currencies started back in 2009 with Bitcoin. So it's been with us for about 13 years now. Bitcoin was the granddaddy of all cryptocurrencies. To this day, they don't really even know who the founder was, which is part of the mystery and aura to it. But it's a technology that was put together with the idea. It was born out of the Great Recession, the crisis that occurred back in 2009. And it's basically an answer to excess money printing by the government. It's a private currency. And since that day that Bitcoin was born, there are now thousands of other cryptocurrencies. They are not the same as Bitcoin. Each has its own different use and case. But Bitcoin remains sort of the central sun, if you will, with all those other cryptocurrencies revolving around it.
Sounds a little confusing, almost like you need to go to a university of cryptocurrency or something to understand it all.
Yeah, the basics are fairly simple, but you're right. Once you dive down the rabbit hole, there is a lot of information to learn, which is part of what we do these interviews for, to try to explain to people, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there on cryptocurrencies. Some are valid and some are downright wrong, but that's just because a lot of people just don't understand the technology yet.
Yeah. So what are these digital currencies being used for right now?
So they're in their infancy. So I equate the digital currency space right now to the way internet back in the late 90s, when internet first came along. We didn't really know what the use cases were going to be for it. So in the world right now, there's payment systems that occur. So there's companies like Square, which have payment systems. They use digital currencies. The blockchain is the underlying technology for digital currencies. And if you, to understand a blockchain, all it is a ledger. Debits and credits, we've had those in accounting for years and years. Well, that ledger gets digitized, and why it's called a blockchain is all of the transactions that occur are blocked, and every few minutes they're added to a chain. So computers keep track of this digital ledger, and they all connect with each other, and they make sure that that digital ledger for each computer is the same. And that way it's called immutable. There can't be changes to that digital ledger. So that's where things are evolving. Our payment systems right now, we've got Visa, we've got MasterCard. We will continue to use those, I believe. Those are companies that are incumbents. They've been there for a long time. But in the background, they're starting to use blockchain technology to underpin their checks and balances as they do their payment systems in behind the scenes.
So you mentioned this is private. So what do governments think about this, and banks for that matter?
That's the million-dollar question. Governments don't like, particularly authoritarian type governments, don't like when there is something separate that they can't control. Even our own governments like to have control, so that there's some checks and balances and oversights. And Bitcoin has had the criticism of being used by the criminal underground networks and all that. And in the past, that's occurred, but that also occurs with U.S. dollars, with Canadian dollars. In fact, up to 5% of transactions that are done in U.S. dollars are considered illicit. So it's not like a cryptocurrency has is the only place where illicit activities would occur. Governments, I think, over time will start to embrace the technology more, but there needs to be regulation for it. So industries like ours, we're happy with the regulations. I think blocking the technology in terms of Bitcoin, it's actually that horse is out of the barn. It's been around for 13 years now. I think jurisdictions in North America, especially, and Europe, are starting to accept it. They would rather tax and regulate it, as opposed to somewhere like China, which has outright tried to ban it. But even to this day, China tried to ban to ban Bitcoin mining. It's still 20% of the world's hash rate comes out of China. So it's virtually impossible to ban it completely.
That's interesting. So can people like literally order a pizza with it? Or I mean, I've heard cases like that. I think it just depends on who accepts it, right?
There was a famous case
Yes.
way back when the guy tried to buy 2 pizzas. He spent 10,000 Bitcoin each, I think, for each pizza. And I haven't done the math today because
I
Bitcoin
think
is quite
today
volatile.
it would have been worth $60,000 or something. It was like the most expensive pizza on
No,
earth.
no, I have tens of millions
Maybe
of
even
dollars.
more,
Is what
yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's crazy. So the poor guy should not have spent his Bitcoins on pizza.
No, he shouldn't have. So you mentioned mining earlier. So maybe tell us a little bit more about how these currencies are mined or created.
Yeah. So if you look at our currency right now, the Canadian dollar, it's created by the central banks. So there's the US central bank, the Fed Reserve, there's the Canadian central banks. That's where our money comes from now. In the Bitcoin world, it comes from an emission schedule. So there's a protocol. What makes Bitcoin different is it was born in the private sector, and every 10 minutes, computers around the world take all of these transactions. They compute and they compete for solving a puzzle that's on the protocol. So there's a mathematical puzzle. Every computer in the Bitcoin network is trying to solve that problem. The winning computer that solves that problem receives Bitcoin as a reward. So right now, it's 6.25 Bitcoins are rewarded every 10 minutes. So there's 900 per day. And these computers are what secures the network. So essentially, they use energy, and that energy is used as sort of a force field to make sure that that computer network stays secure, which the Bitcoin network is now the most secure network on the planet, secured by over 2 million specialized computers that are continually trying to solve this mathematical puzzle. So unlike the central banks, which sort of print money behind the scenes out of thin air, no one really knows how much the Federal Reserve prints every day, or the Canadian banks. They'll report it, but behind the scenes, it's very difficult to tell that number. In the Bitcoin world, you can tell exactly how many Bitcoins are produced per day, how many will be produced next year. The end game is only 21 million. So it's a scarce resource. When something is scarce, it becomes more valuable over time as its utility increases.
That's incredible. Okay, so your company, Modern Mining, that's what you do, right? You create cryptocurrency, and you are located in Medicine Hat, right?
Correct. We're a Bitcoin miner based in Alberta, out of Medicine Hat.
Yep. Why did you choose Medicine Hat for a mining location?
So the Alberta electricity market, and electricity is our biggest expense in the business, is deregulated, but there are regulations in Alberta. So throughout most of Alberta, you have to pay transmission and distribution charges. Alberta allows municipalities to produce their own electricity. And what's unique about Medicine Hat is there are large gas fields in the area. So energy for Medicine Hat is produced through these through generators for these gas fields. And the transmission and distribution charges, which are one of our biggest expenses on the electricity cost side, is less expensive there. So, we worked with the municipality. Businesses like ours, bring in jobs, and that's what municipalities want. So they've been wonderful to work with, and we certainly would like to continue to grow in Alberta, stay within Canada. There are some difficulties in the Canadian system with, we're trying to work with other jurisdictions that are a little bit more friendly to Bitcoin miners, but we certainly would like to develop the technology more north of the border here.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think Medicine Hat or maybe other parts of Southern Alberta could become kind of like a hub for this new kind of mining?
I think they could. Yeah, I think the Alberta government has a mandate to try to expand our business within Alberta beyond oil and gas. We're trying to diversify our electrical sector so that it's not reliant on fossil fuels. I think Bitcoin mining, one of the big utilities of it is that it can help to balance out electrical grids. So as we move towards more wind and solar, the sun always doesn't shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And so what energy providers have to do is they build those solar farms and wind farms much greater scale than they need to be, because on days when it's cloudy and not windy, you don't have as much energy. So if you put a Bitcoin miner on site, then when there's too much energy produced, windy days, sunny days, Bitcoin miners can use that energy because it's in abundance. When there's no wind and no sun, there's less energy produced. We need to, turn on our machines at home. Then the Bitcoin miners can shut down. There's more energy to go out to the grid. So instead of these highs and lows that you get, it tends to flatline the grid much more and keep the prices stable. So there's one of the real world utilities where power companies are starting to recognize that a fleet of Bitcoin miners on site monetizes that excess energy and helps to reduce prices and costs for you and I at home.
Interesting. So is solar a viable power source then for your kind of mining?
It's coming along. It's the problem with solar, right? Is our battery technology is getting there. It's not quite there yet. So it's great when the sun's shining, but what do you do at nighttime when all of a sudden the electricity disappears? The miners we use, they're very expensive. So they like to be online 24/7, 365. So as battery technology improves, I think solar is going to be a much more useful in Bitcoin mining. But there are companies out there right now. I believe Square's one of them. Tesla might be as well. I think they're testing out large scale solar Bitcoin mining operations. And like I mentioned previously, I don't have a crystal ball for the future, but I do believe it's going to be a strong part of our network in the future on our electrical grid to help stabilize things.
That's so interesting. Okay, so on the topic of southern Alberta, of course, so one of the big topics of conversation in this region is Orphan Wells. So how is your company or maybe others helping with a solution to this?
That's a unique problem to Alberta. I mean, we're in oil and gas, and we know there's thousands of orphan wells out there that need to be remediated. Well, the government, the taxpayer, they don't want to pay for it. Industry doesn't want to pay for it, but yet you've got thousands of wells out there. To my knowledge, no one is doing this right now, but we would be absolutely open to using Bitcoin mining to monetize the energy that's on site. And one of the beauties with Bitcoin miners is they're very portable. So you can take them, move them all over. They can go to remote sites. You could utilize that energy, turn that energy into dollars, use those dollars to then remediate the site. Each well site, whether it's $10,000 or $1 million, depending on what's been done there in the past, that would be a way where the taxpayer wouldn't be on the hook. The private sector can solve a problem. We can help diversify Alberta's economy, and we can get some of this environmental problem cleaned up. I think it's a huge utility use case for Bitcoin, which honestly, it hasn't even been looked at very much at all. But I think in the future, it would be a great option.
So interesting. How big is this cryptocurrency sector currently?
It's big. It's growing from zero 13 years ago to over $1 trillion now. It's an industry that's here to stay. It is volatile. So like the stock market, sometimes Bitcoin and certain cryptocurrencies get the reputation for a reason because they're so volatile. They're used by traders. There's good actors and bad actors in any business. And so we see that. We see a lot of volatility, even with Bitcoin right now. I think as time goes on, as governments get more involved, private industry gets more involved, public companies get more involved, you're going to see that volatility decrease. So we're about $1 trillion right now. It was up to 3 trillion at one point. So
Wow.
we're in a bear market right now. It's a little bit tougher in our industry, but the strong survive, and I think they'll come out much stronger as things tend to increase.
That's so interesting. How does somebody get started in it if you don't have it? Somebody
Yeah,
just like Joe Schmo.
Yeah, you could actually go online. It's much more regulated now. So there are exchange houses where you can open up an account, know your client. So you'll fill out some various forms, driver's license you'll have to send in. And then you can open up, so it's like a brokerage account, and you can buy Bitcoin straight off those exchange houses. Now, once you get a little bit more involved, you can hold your coins privately. So that's part of the interest in Bitcoin is instead of holding your wealth at a bank where there's third-party liabilities to it and it has to be insured by the government and lots of checks and balances. In this case, you can actually hold your wealth separately in your own. I have one of them right here. This is a little ledger device, so you could literally have $100,000 if you want it on a ledger device. Only the codes and access, so there's no third-party liability risk with
That's so crazy. What do you think is the future of cryptocurrency? Do you think it is the way of the future?
I do. I think there has to be, for any new technology, there has to be utility to it. So right now there's probably 20,000 different cryptocurrencies, tokens out there. I think 95% of them will die. I think trial and error companies are in there, seeing what works, seeing what sticks and what doesn't. I think certain of them, and it's very much like the internet was back in the late 90s, the Amazons of the world were born out of that. And I think you're going to see the same thing occurring right now. Those 20,000 are going to get whittled down, but those that do exist and continue will get much larger. I think Bitcoin, the granddaddy of them all, will be integrated to, like I said, Orphan Wells to help that. It'll get integrated into industry. Greenhouses, for example. If you want to grow food more locally and not import it from Mexico and California, long ways away, you could grow it locally. Well, how about using the heat that Bitcoin miners produce to heat greenhouses and reduce the cost there? So I think there's a great opportunity to localize things in terms of food growth production using Bitcoin miners as a heat source. So I think there's a great future ahead of it.
Absolutely fascinating. But Ryan, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us and filling us in on the world of digital currency.
Absolutely, Jeanette. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. That was Ryan Chernitsky, Director of Modern Mining, digging for digital values in Medicine Hat, Alberta.